The podcast that you are getting ready to either listen to or watch was previously recorded. Any opportunity to participate as far as a producer on this film is no longer available. However, we do encourage you to go out to thetruthaboutreading.com so that you can help us further spread the message about literacy and subliteracy across the country. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the podcast.
I have with me Nora Chahbazi.
Perfect.
I'm very proud of myself for things like that. And I want to tell you a little bit about how Nora and I met. And then I really want to just give Nora the opportunity to just talk about herself and share with you just an amazing journey that she's been on, and one that, you know, you can join her and me along the way to really help with the documentary that we're working on. But I was recently out in Hollywood, and there's another documentary that all of you know that I've been working on, which is the Dick Vitale story. Really getting to know the man behind, you know, the man behind the awesome baby. Mm-hmm. So, and when I was there, I had the opportunity to meet Nora and John, and I just immediately gravitated to both of them because Nora had this like Hollywood smile and just great personality, and John was just extremely wonderful. But then I didn't really realize what they were there, what they were going to be talking about, what they were there for. And they are actually doing a documentary called The Truth About Reading. And it's about, you know, really shedding a light on a crisis that's just hiding in plain sight, and that's about literacy. And there's a connectivity that I think that Nora and I share, because she has spent pretty much most of her life helping people learn how to read, helping people become more proficient. And I know it all started with her daughter, and she's going to share her story and her journey on that. But for me, when I work with a divorcee or a widow, there's this shame around not being, literate in certain things when it comes to your finances and your money. And that shame is something that's very, very difficult to kind of walk away from and work your way through. And there was something, Nora, that you had said in a conversation we had recently, and it really made me think about the people that are just in my own life and in my own circle. And you said, think about how many people, and it wasn't exactly what you said, but think about how many people are doing things in their life right now because of this shame or this stigma associated with not being able to read or not being, proficient in what they were doing. Think about how their life would have been tremendously different if they could have just found the help that, is out there for them, and found somebody like you who could have intervened in their life. Think about how incredibly different their life would be. So that profoundly hit me, because I know that there's been two people in my own life who that I knew who just kind of shrugged it off. And one woman I know is doing exactly what she's doing because she felt like this is all that she could do. And it was just not wanting to admit and move on. So, back to in Hollywood, when I got to see the trailer, The Truth About Reading, and saw John's story and learned more and listened to him. And it was just a project that I had to get involved with. So I am, again, very excited to have you here. And I have a bunch of questions for you. So why don't you just start off with, tell me a little bit about you, for those who don't know you, and tell me about what your business is.
Okay. Back in the mid to late 90s, I was a neonatal intensive care nurse, and I had been doing that for about a decade. I also was a wife of a Navy doctor, and we had lived all over the world and recently moved back to Michigan, our home state, from Guam. And I had 3 daughters at that time, and I still do, of course. But my middle daughter, when she was in school, the year after we got back here, she was in 2nd grade, and she was put in gifted and talented because her math scores were so high. She was in the 98th percentile on a the Iowa test, and in math. But she was a year below grade level already in 2nd grade in reading. And I'd been volunteering in her classroom, and she had appeared to be, faked her way, which is very common, to look like a good reader because she was very good at memorizing. She could memorize a whole story and she loved looking at the ceiling while she read it, but she could not read anything that she hadn't read before. In her classroom, they would put the story on a tape and the kids would read along, and then the teacher would read it, and then they'd read it with each other. So they read the story probably 12 or 15 times a week. And she's like, I got this down. Who needs the book? So it was more of a speech for her. She was great. She's a brilliant child. She was great at memorizing her spelling words. She couldn't spell them by the time she got home later that day. So in second grade, over that summer between first and second grade, this child was read to every day of her life. A lot of times people say, well, if the parents read to them, and then she's had also life experiences all over the world that many people don't even have in a lifetime. And so she could not, if you gave her a book that she wasn't familiar with, she's very, and still to this day, a sweet, mellow, darling human being, but she'd throw the book across the room. She could not read any of that. So I started looking into, what was going on and researching reading. And I did that for about 6 months. And everything that I had read talked about either whole language, where you just memorize the whole English language. And I'm like, that makes, in my scientific mind too, from being a nurse, I'm like, that makes no sense whatsoever. But then phonics, where there's rules and exceptions to rules. She'd already been taught a systematic phonics program in Guam. And that worked when there was one letter, but when it got to words like eat, where 2 letters spelled a sound, or I don't know, nice, where 2 letters spell a sound, she was just like, I don't know what's going on here. And then there'd be rules, but there's so many exceptions to the rules. And then she's like, that doesn't make any sense. And so I really didn't know what to do. And about 6 months in, my mom called me and said, because all I was talking about was either my children or reading instruction, actually. And my mom called and said, I have these 12-year-old neighbor twin boys that are both in special education. And they went to this place in East Lansing, about an hour from where I live, and for 12 hours of instruction, and now they're out of special ed. And I'm like, and I weigh 98 pounds. Come on, Mom. But she did have the name of the person who owned the reading center there and the number. So she gave it to me, and I called the center, and the owner answered herself. And I said, okay, 12 hours of instruction, whatever, but what are you doing? Are you teaching phonics? Are you teaching whole language? How are you fixing these people? And she had been a former professor at Michigan State University for 3 decades. And she said to me back in 1997, by the way, research shows exactly what you need to do to teach anybody how to teach reading. However, it's not taught to teachers in college, and it's not taught in schools. And I thought that was the most absurd thing anybody had ever said to me in my life. Now, almost 25 years later, I've lived it, and it's absolutely true. And now it's coming out more and more how true that is. And as crazy as it sounds, how true it is. So she said, I started teaching based on what the research shows, and basically kind of got pushed out of her tenured job at the university, and friends that she'd had for decades wouldn't speak to her anymore. So she left there and opened her own reading center and did a whole bunch of research and all. And she said, truly, it shouldn't take, unless somebody has significant cognitive deficits or issues like that, it shouldn't take more than an average of 12 hours to teach someone to read. So she told me about a book called Why Our Children Can't Read and What You Can Do About It. And at this point, I had read between 50 and 100 books. I mean, this was my full-time job. I hadn't gone back to nursing since we'd moved back from Guam, because I still had Kelly, my youngest, was in preschool, and I was going to wait till she got in school. So this was my full-time job. And so I ordered the book she told me about, Why Our Children Can't Read and What We Can Do About It, by Diane McGinnis. And it came in the mail. It still wasn't out in stores so I had to get it from the publisher. And I read the entire book, and it's a pretty hefty book, before I went to bed that night, because it was the first thing I had got my hands on that made sense. And it talked about this book called Reading Reflex. And it was a $15 book that I bought, and I taught Colleen to read in 3 hours. In 3 hours, she came home, and people say, that can't be true. How dare you say such, blasphemous things? But it is true. And she came home from school with a Bailey Schoolhouse book. Now, this is a child that's never read a book on her own that she hadn't already memorized. And she's like, Mom, can I read this? And I'm like, if she'd have said, Mom, can I run up on the roof and dive off head first? I wouldn't have been, more shocked. I'm like, what? So she sits, and I can still see it in our house there. She's sitting on this little love seat, and she's reading. And there's a whole page of print and then a picture on each page, but it's a chapter book. And she sat there for probably 2.5 to 3 hours. I'm calling my mom, I'm calling her dad, I'm calling my sisters. And they're like, is she really reading it? I'm like, it looks like it. It seems like the right amount of time. I don't know. And she got done with it. She told me all about it. And she's been a phenomenal reader ever since. Went to school in honors classes and all. And her spelling took about 2 years, to come along. So I started talking to friends. We had moved from Guam, and we came to this, white collar neighborhood, and we chose the town, and we chose the school. It was supposed to be the best school and all. And a lot of other doctors and lawyers and, professional people, almost every one of them had a child who was struggling with reading. So I'd bring them in my house and just volunteer and teach them. I got kids out of special ed. I was doing all this crazy stuff. And I'm like, what is going on? And so I had a friend who was an administrative level at the county level in education. And she had a child who couldn't read, and I fixed him and got him reading. And she said, I have this money. We could go to this, phonographics was the program that I was using and teaching. We could go and get trained by them, and I can pay for everything, my whatever county will pay for like the hotel and all this kind of stuff. So let's go get trained. So we went and got trained, and then you only had to teach somebody for, I don't know, like 6. I'd already been teaching a bunch of people their stuff through this book, but then you can become a trainer. So I became a trainer. My then husband was in the process of opening a wellness center. And he said, instead of traipsing all these kids through our house, why don't you have a room in this wellness center, and you can teach them there. And I'm like, okay. I was having the time of my life. It was so rewarding and fun. And about a month before, he'd rented the building and all of this, and about a month before it was supposed to open, his whole wellness center fell through, and I had an entire reading center. So all this divine intervention happening. And so I started training teachers. Actually, even a few months before I opened my reading center, I started training teachers in phonographics. And I did that for about 4 years. In that time, I ended up getting divorced. And actually, I can relate to some of that financial illiteracy stuff that you talked about at the beginning, which was interesting with owning a business and all of that too. So I ended up opening a reading center, training teachers, being so immersed in this and learning so much about how deep and wide and far the problems are with literacy instruction way back in the 90s, and nobody was talking about it. Now, in the last 4 or 5 years, it's become a thing, but nobody was talking it. And I'm like, this is insane. Here I am from outside the education system, and like, what is going on? And about 4 years into training teachers, which I did several hundred in phonographics, which was really a one-on-one program that was focused mostly on doing speech to print phonics instruction. I credit it so much for giving me the foundation of what I learned, but it wasn't really good for classroom teachers. And I thought, we can't intervention our way with one-on-one instruction when 65% of the fourth graders in our country are not proficient in reading. We've got to get this to teachers. So that's where Ebley was born. So Ebley stands for Evidence-Based Literacy Instruction, and it's a system of strategies and activities and lessons and teacher training to help teachers get all of their kids, the highest ones, which Colleen was in the gifted and talented, and even the higher readers, all the way down to the ones that can't read at all, to their very highest potential, which is typically grade level or above. And so I have spent my life really since 2003 really focusing on teaching teachers so they can get this to kids and so that they can present it in a way that's not overwhelming to them. I also own a reading center in Michigan that really we don't speak much about, and people find us from all over. We have a huge waiting list, 50 to 100 people at all times, and we see people for an average about 12 hours, anywhere from little kids to senior citizens. So doing that, but really my focus is on training the teachers, classroom teachers, as well as remediation teachers, ideally kindergarten through third grade teachers. So we have the fence at the top of the cliff instead of the ambulance at the bottom, where we're trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, which happens. We do that, a lot of that too. We've taught a lot of adults. So that is what I've been doing, for years and years. And it is my purpose in life. I know that. People say, oh, do you miss nursing? And I even forget that I was a nurse. When somebody has a health problem or whatever, I remember all those numbers and what the lab should be and all of that. But this is what I was born to do, for sure. And so back in probably 2008, I had a teacher that I had trained and was doing great work with Ebley. She was a reading specialist. And she called me. She said, I'm stranded in this really seedy mechanic shop, and I'm not going to sit on the seats because it's pretty gross, in a really rural area. And she said, there's only one magazine, and it's the Rotarian with Dolly Parton on the front. And in it was a article about John Corcoran, who was a teacher who couldn't read. And he didn't learn to read. He taught high school for 17 years, reading at a low elementary level, taught history most of that time. And he didn't learn to read till he was 48. And so she said, when I'm reading this article, it sounds like this is your literacy soulmate. He says the same analogies, he's talking the same stuff. And I'm like, who is this guy? So we had the internet at the time, and I Googled him, and there was a phone number. And whenever there's a phone number of somebody that makes a lot of sense, and usually there's only a handful in all these years that I've found when it makes sense with literacy, I pick up the phone and call. And just like Annette Weinshank in East Lansing, almost always the main person picks up the phone. So John picked up the phone when I called, and we talked for over 3 hours. And he has been, he's been on Oprah and Larry King and everything under the sun. So he's used to people wanting something from him, really. And I just wanted a literacy, companion who was really passionate about it. And I could tell that he was. He had started, after he learned to read, he wrote his book. He started a literacy foundation and had done a lot of work with that, and was a keynote speaker all around the world about, sharing his story and all of that. So John and I became, we never partnered officially, but we became really bosom buddies as far as how our passion, I don't think either of us knew anybody else as obnoxious as the other as far as literacy goes. So we did a lot of things, and I'd go out to California, he'd come to Michigan, we'd go to Chicago for a conference, or Colorado, lots of different things that we did, just mutually helping each other. And that has evolved, where his foundation started to train teachers when No Child Left Behind, supplemental services and all, and they trained them in Ebley, and did a lot of different things that way. So over the years, John and I have talked sometimes every day for months and months at a time. And once in a while we'd go for a little bit and not, but kept very close in contact with, this is what I'm learning. What are you learning? This is what I'm doing. And so he called me a couple of years ago, and he said, Jack Canfield has this thing, I don't even know what you call it, summit, I think, at his house in Santa Barbara in March. And it's a lot of money. And you get to bring somebody, and the person that you bring is supposed to be a observer, but I want to bring you, and I want you to be a full participant so that we can, get them. We wanted research like on Ebley. John wants a movie, motion picture movie on his story. We had like 5 things. I mean, we prepared for this a lot. So you go out there for 3 days, you're at Jack Canfield's house, and there's only like 15 people, and they give you all kinds of feedback about all this stuff. And I'm like, sure, I'll do that. That sounds cool. So the day before I was to fly out to California in March of 2020, ta-da, guess what comes up? COVID. It's literally the country shuts down the day before my plane takes off.
Yep.
So we didn't go there. So in September, Jack started doing these things virtually. So we did 3 days on the computer, which is a long time on the computer, I must say. But it was fascinating. I think there was 12 people or so. So you get to present to Jack's team, and they give you this feedback. You're on this hot seat, and you have 10 minutes. I mean, we practiced. I can talk fast, as you can hear. And boom, ba-doom, ba-doom. So I said, we want this, we want this, we want this, this is this, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, if we had a week, we could maybe deal with all those things. So he's talking about, they're giving us suggestions, really good suggestions. They said, instead of doing a motion picture film, we think you should do a documentary. And you need to get a hold of Nick Nanton because he's the person to do it. And here's his number, and here's his, and we're like, really? Wow. Okay. So the day after the 3 days was done, we sent Nick an email, and John, about his story and all of this. And he says, that's interesting, but there needs to be more. We're like, you want more? We got more. So then I typed up this whole long, several paragraph, thing about, this is the rest of the story, kind of like Paul Harvey. Here's the rest of the story. So then he was like, oh, and this was in October. And by November, there was a press release. We were going. I mean, and John and I looked back and we're like, you think that if we knew what this was going to be, we would, we definitely would have done it. But it's definitely, neither of us knew anything about fundraising or movie making or anything. So it's been quite a wild ride the last year. So that's how the whole documentary came about. And my life's mission is to make sure, and John's is too, that there is no more unnecessary suffering like my daughter had, and like I've taught tens of thousands of people in classrooms and in our center and all over Tarnation, on an airplane, all over the place. I seriously, watch out, because I have a little whiteboard even in my purse that I can show you, and teach you very quickly. But there's so much suffering of children and adults who haven't been taught how to read. And there's so much suffering the teachers who are working their tails off, not knowing that they weren't taught what they needed to be taught in college after paying all that money, whether they're getting their undergrad, their master's in reading, it doesn't matter. They aren't given what they need. And a lot of what they're given, unfortunately, is actually going to be more harmful than even neutral, much less helpful. And, that's a pretty heavy load. And it's there's so much that's to this whole literacy thing. And to me, I've been hiding in the bushes or behind a brick wall all of these years, because I'm like, I am not, they call them the reading wards. And I'm like, I'm not getting out there in that. These people are vicious, and they would cut your head off, to stay at their, this is right, I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm right and you're wrong kind of thing. Not looking at, we have 35% of our fourth graders proficient in reading in our country. That's what we need to be talking about. So anyway, that's how this all evolved, and that's how we're here with this film.
Well, and there were a lot of things, even just since we had gotten an opportunity to meet each other, just listening to John give just a glimpse of his story when we were out in California. He still goes right back to that. You can see when he's
the
talking,
emotion comes up. Yep.
The emotion comes up.
And he's going to be 84 next month.
And just how he, how it really affected his life, all the things that, he looks back on now, and he goes right back to where it was, and that shame and that
feeling. Yep.
I mean, it grabbed me, by the heart. And a lot of it too, a couple questions I have for you too is, we have grandchildren, and I graduated high school in 1989. And one of my friends who couldn't read, she was a cosmetologist. She straight up said to me, she said, I graduated high school and went through cosmetology school, and I only knew enough of what I needed to do to get by. That was it. I memorized the different colors. I memorized all the different things. I knew how to sign my name. That was it. But she says, you know what? I always wanted to be a cosmetologist. So I it was kind of the path that I had chosen. But then I have another friend who settled, and it was because it was too hard, and they felt that they were too old at that stage to go back and to learn and to get to that level. Like,
well, they don't think that anybody can teach them. If
Right.
somebody were going to teach them, they would have taught them already. They also think they're the problem. They think that they're broken, their brain is broken, they're dumb, they can't. And even your cosmetology friend, her life has been much more complicated, even though she's doing what she wanted to do. It could have been such an easier path if she had been taught how to read. And she can be taught. I mean, the oldest person I ever taught was 82. He'd actually retired as the city planner of Los Angeles, had 2 master's degrees, never read a full book in his life. He said, I could read, we call it subliterate. You're well below where you could or should be. But he said, I would get a quarter of the way into a book, and I'm like, I have no idea what happened even in the last page, much less 2 chapters ago. So he said, I've never in my life read a whole book. And I worked with him. This is not usually senior citizens. It takes a little bit more because there's so much undoing of bad habits. But 2 hours I taught this man, and he would call me every single month with a book report, bless you. And he would tell me, he would give me now I'm reading 3 books. You want to hear about these? And he would, every single month for a year, he would tell me he was so thrilled, and he had such a curious mind, but he didn't have the opportunity to be able to expand that through reading. I've taught a cardiovascular surgeon. Actually, he was just interviewed for the film too. I've taught, David, who's on there, multi-millionaire. We're going to be doing a webinar on him actually on Thursday. Right now I'm teaching a business owner from California who is brilliant and has won a high-level Apple award from Apple that only 20 people were awarded in companies for the great work she does in her business. And part of the award is to take courses at 2 different colleges. And she's like, uh-oh. And she was reading 67 words a minute just a couple weeks ago, which is about a 2nd grade level. And she's like, I don't understand anything. I can get through some of these words, but I I can't do this stuff. It takes so long. And so she's like, do I give this award back? I can't. So now she's reading just in 4 hours of instruction. It's unbelievable what can happen. And so the tragedy and the trauma, it's PTSD for these people. And it happens that, they're walking through our door all the time here at my reading center, 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds. The trauma starts very young, and they really think they're the only one, which they're not at all. It's actually the majority, unfortunately. And they think that they're the problem. They're the broken thing. And we give them labels and that type of thing too, to reinforce that. Well, you're this, you're learning disabled, you're whatever, all kinds of labels that we put on them, which those kinds of things, I suppose, could be used in the background by the adults. Why are we saying this to children and saying, your fault, you can't read, when it's not? It's the fault of the instruction, and the teachers aren't given the instruction that they need to do the job that they need to do. So it's really very tragic, and we are suffering significantly as a society, and every single person watching this has a lot of people in their life that are subliterate, and they have no idea about it. These people will say things like, oh, I forgot my glasses. I don't like to spell. I don't like reading. Reading's not fun for me. Oh, I don't need that. I get the internet. Or all of these things where on the inside, they're exploding, like David, the 62-year-old that's on the teaser, who literally about 3 years ago, his stomach exploded. It ruptured from all, and the doctors said it was all this stress hormone that ate away his stomach that he's been experiencing since he was 5 years old. Unnecessarily, because he learned to read at 62.
That's crazy. I mean, you think about it, and my granddaughter my grandchildren came out and visited us last year, and it was, they weren't in school. It was virtual learning, live in New York. And I sat down one day, because they had all been given laptops, and I sat down one day and I started helping her with her homework, just sitting down, making sure that she moved through, and she literally just would stare at me, and I would try to get her to walk through the page, and and she's in IEP, I think they call it. And then when
how old is she?
She is 8. So, and then you have it to where now they're not doing any writing. Like, she forgot to write her name, she forgot, and you're doing everything on the computer, and she couldn't associate any of it. Like, she just couldn't.
But the instruction is what gets them to there. And that's the problem. See, my family, I have 3 grandchildren. I have lots of great nieces and nephews. And this is my rule. No one goes to school until I've taught them to read. Nobody goes to school. You're not going to go to school. Now, even so, you'll get to school. Like, I have one niece that I taught, and then her mom's like, well, I'm going to let the school. She's on a great path. She goes to school. It undoes everything that we did, and then gets her all the bad habits. Very bright child who becomes very good at looking at the picture and guessing the word, and misreading all over the place and misspelling like a crazy woman. And it took a lot of work and time then, after a year of that, to undo those things. And that's the tragedy of it. It really is. And so your granddaughter, I have some thoughts about that. But we can't keep letting this happen and then saying, oh, well, because you have an IEP, that means you're in special education. When we have 20, 30, 40%, there's too many kids. I mean, 60% of your kids are below grade level in your school, which is not unusual. And even in affluent places, people are like, oh, this is a poor problem. This is a Black problem. No, yeah, it is that problem too. It's an everywhere problem though. It doesn't discriminate. It is everywhere. And people need to be aware of how deep and wide and horrific it is, because we are like, yeah, they don't really like to read. Yeah, these kids start crying, they get stomach aches, they aren't going to write, they aren't going to, all of these things. We have a school, she's a superintendent now, a principal I know, she was on I did a webinar, it was like a panel webinar, and they shared how they improved their reading. She's from Missouri, and her school was 13% of her 3rd graders were proficient in reading 5 years ago. 3 years later, 93% were proficient. She did a whole plan, changed how they did instruction, looked at the data, did all this whole thing. She's absolutely amazing, has the greatest accent too. And so that was 2 years ago. Now then, 2 years of COVID, right? So these kids that were in 3rd grade, and 93% of them were proficient, this past spring during the COVID year, they retested them at the state test. which usually, like in Michigan, I think our state test average is 33% proficient or something like that. 100% of her students were proficient, including every single special ed student. And I think it was 70% were highly proficient. So at the very tip top, nobody can say, well, hardly anybody. Some people get 95, but 100%, that does not happen. But it is happening in all these places where nobody really hears about it because they're like, well, you know, they can't. They're this, they're that, they're special ed, they're whatever. And they can.
Well, and I think there's two, like there's the classic way or the traditional way or whatever you want to say it, that teachers were taught to teach. And it's essentially, from what I'm hearing or learning, is it's pretty ineffective. If you have all of these children and these statistics that are off the chart of, you know, them not being proficient in reading, but then you have what you do and what you do with Ebley and all that, and people can learn to read in a matter of hours.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Even in a whole class, yeah.
Well, why do you feel, and we don't have to get into like a political, you know, like, why do you feel they're not embracing that? Do the teachers feel attacked? Do they feel like, what is the reason?
Here is, you know, when I was getting into this and even before, well, actually back in the 50s, really, but there was this 60s mindset of whole language, and then it became balanced literacy of, this is what good readers do. Good readers read automatically. They use context and all this type of thing. So what this Kenneth Goodman is the kind of the grandfather that, you know, well, he's passed recently, but he's the one who started this whole thing and said, reading is really a guessing game. You don't want to all those squiggly things, worry about those letters and all that stuff. Just figure it out. If you say horse instead of pony, that's cool. But what the mindset was, which was smart, it was a good theory to check out. Let's teach kids how to read, how good readers, using what good readers do. Okay, so we read automatically, we free up our mind. But what happened, it's kind of like saying it didn't go well because you can't become a good reader until you have all these building blocks in place to get there. And all these reading is the most challenging thing we do as human beings by far. That would kind of be like saying, all right, Jennifer, I want you to be a good pilot. So you're going to learn to be a good pilot by doing what good pilots do. So hop on in that cockpit and take on off and practice flying. Not a good plan, right? It's not going to go well. You have to have the foundational skills and some practice. And flying, quite frankly, is a whole lot easier than learning to read. So that's where they went wrong. But it took off like gangbusters. So we put kids now, and we have for decades, in kindergarten, in the second week of school, reading to each other. The first week in first grade, reading to each other when they can't read. So we get them practicing doing it while they're making all kinds of mistakes, so they get good at making mistakes. They look at the picture, they guess the word, or I like, or, you know, the money is green, the tree is green. So they know is green, and is green, and then they look at the picture, you know, the whatever is green. So we're getting them to look at the picture, which is a very inefficient. We don't read the pictures, we read the words. So we're not getting the kids to be in tune, sometimes to the first, you know, in balanced literacy stuff, they have them especially look at the first sound or throw in a little bit of stuff here and there, but English is a code. And if you're not taught the code, think at the back of a cereal box. They might have a triangle and that means P, and a square means ah, and a circle means T or whatever. Okay, I can make pot and I can make top, but if you don't tell me what sounds go with those symbols, I can't do anything. Triangle, square, circle, I don't know. So there's a system of logic, and English is a code. And kids think it's great fun when they're actually taught the code in a way that makes sense. Very few are, unfortunately. So we just keep snowballing. So why do teachers now? Well, teachers, there's several things. They do feel attacked. Bless their hearts. I don't know how they do what they do, quite frankly, especially late in the last couple of years. And they do feel attacked, you know, and there's a concern about this over focus on phonics, which is not totally unwarranted. I mean, because certain traditional phonics programs sometimes last for years, many, many hours a week for years, one-on-one. And teachers are like, we're not going to do that to all of these kids that, you know, what they do for kids who are diagnosed with dyslexia or whatever, that type of thing. So they have this, it's a lack of knowledge on both parts, and it's a huge lack of disrespect from both sides. And probably 80 to 90% of what happens in schools is the balanced literacy. So, with a sprinkle, a little salt and pepper of some phonics, where doing the explicit instruction in the phonics, but getting right into a book is not, so there's a lot of misconceptions. And there's a lot of, it's kind of like the political, atmosphere these days. If you're a Republican, you're either great or you're the devil. If you're a Democrat, you're either great or the devil. And then the other ones, you're all right and I'm all wrong. You're all right and I'm all wrong. Or you're all wrong and I'm all right. It's just like this whole, and it's not that way. But there's these reading wars have been going on since easily the 1950s and 60s. And so and kids get caught in the crosshairs along with teachers.
It's
a big mess. It's a big, big mess. And Nick is doing a phenomenal job wading through all of this and, picking out the truth and what's important. And so our goal is we don't need to be clawing each other's eyes out, whoever side, because both sides have things that they are very valid, some more than others. And here's the thing that we should all be talking about. Who's got 95 to 100% of their kids proficient? Let's do what they do. That's it. That's the end of the
and it all comes down to exactly what you're saying. I think a lot of it has to do with ego. A lot of it has to do with, whatever it is. But
power, politics, ego, and money. Those are the power, politics, ego, money. That's it.
But if you have somebody who is teaching in a way that 100%, 90%, whatever, are now where they need to be, if not above.
Yeah.
And you have a system that has been doing something one way for a long time, and the percentages may be high, but they're in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Why would you not go into the direction of helping as many, and it's not just our kids, adults.
A lot of adults. Well, because these kids become adults, and it was interesting because when the teaser came out, there was a comment on something on social media where a teacher said, I've been teaching for decades, and it never occurred to me. People always said, well, they'll get it when they leave your classroom, a second grade teacher or something. Once they leave your classroom, they're going to get it. And she's like, it never occurred to me that they're going to become adults that are still in the same place they were in second grade. So that was really eye-opening to me, but where are they going to get it? If you're not teaching reading instruction in K1 and 2, are they going to pick it up? It's going to drop in their head, or where is that going to come from? So there's a lot of those kinds of misconceptions that teachers, because you haven't come up through the education system, and I haven't come up through the education system, we're at a disadvantage because we don't understand where that culture and mindset is. So that's a question that you're asking, Jennifer, that I've been asking for 25 years. And guess what? I still don't have the answer. I think that these teachers don't feel respected, understandably, because people are vicious. People who are doing going along with what the research says and stuff, they're very black and white. They're very, I'm all right and you're all wrong. And let me cut you off at the legs and then chop your head off too. Not all, but the vocal ones. It's always the vocal ones. And then these ones doing the same thing right back. So we're never going to get anywhere when we're using machetes to chop each other up. There's a lot of common ground, and there's a lot of places where it could be worked together. But I found one in all these years who would even have a conversation with me. But then they won't really, he wouldn't really have a conversation. I mean, we've had several conversations, but he sneaks out of the hard questions. He won't answer them. And I'm like, just answer my questions. I really want to know this. What is this, or why is that? But there's all kinds of, whatever that's called, spin. And the kids keep becoming adults that can't read, and they're traumatized, and they do all kinds of things, including commit suicide. And
it makes you wonder. And so if we have somebody in our life, or somebody who's watching this has somebody, whether it's in their inner circle or a friend or somebody that maybe they're noticing the characteristics of, because how many people have I'm on 50 years old. Have I ever been, sitting and listening and lecturing, and they go up to write and they're like, oh, I'm just a horrible speller. And they're writing stuff that in some
they probably would hide from that. They would avoid them.
But I mean, so if you have somebody that that is not proficient or is struggling, how do you approach them in a way where it's not a touchy subject, or it's not a, like, you just genuinely want to help them? How do you do that? And then where do you send them? Who do you send them to?
There's a couple of things that I would say. There's a educational journalist from American Public Media that has opened the door in the past 4 years for this whole shift to be open enough for a documentary to even happen. So what I would say is Google APM, At a Loss for Words. It's a radio documentary, and listen to that, because it's going to show you how, oh, wait a minute, this isn't me. That's very non-threatening. I would share with them the teaser, because that teaser has opened the doors for a lot of people to say, oh my, most everybody thinks, we've had people walk through our door here at my reading center and like, I'm the only one in the class. My kid's the only one in the school. The next person that walks through as they're walking out is their classmate. We've had that happen more than once, actually. But these parents were told, your kid's the only one in the school. So people think they're the only one in this class or whatever. They think they're the only one, which is definitely not true. So that is something. Now, we have an app. It's $4.99. It's called Sight Words Made Easy. So if there's somebody middle school or above, or even elementary school and above, that are struggling, we have two other ones that are, one for very beginning readers and one called Ebley Space. But for $4.99, they can get this on their phone or on their Android or whatever, iPad, on their Kindle Fire, and they can do the learning in the privacy of their own corner, where nobody has to know or see. These people are so ashamed. They feel it's kind of like, it is a form of abuse. It's like someone who's sexually abused. They think it's their fault and they don't want anybody to know because they must keep it a secret. And the depth of the trauma, if people could see these adults in the depth of their trauma, and even John, after he's now been able to read for 35 years, the depth of that trauma is still there, we would be doing everything in our power to prevent this, because they're everywhere, and they're working so hard to do life, and they always have to be on guard to make sure somebody doesn't know their dirty secret, and watch out, like, oh my gosh, I just did that wrong and pressed that button wrong because I didn't read that thing wrong, and now I have to make up some excuse. They're constantly living life in their head to, oh, I can't read the menu, so let's see what they ordered, or what, I guess I can ask the person. Talking to David, he said, I was talking about birthday cards. We had a fourth grader who the mom was so thrilled because he actually read his birthday cards. And David said, that's so funny. He's 62. And he said, from the time I was a child, all through adulthood, I'd get a birthday card and I'd look at it, and at every word I'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in my head, because I thought that might be about the amount of time that you would take to read that card. So that's what I would do. And then I'd say, oh, thank you so much. That's so sweet. I appreciate that. And put the card down. Couldn't read any of the words in it, didn't know what the heck they were saying, but hopefully it was nice. Think of all the things that you can't do when you are illiterate or subliterate, and when you know that you're not understanding what you're supposed to understand, and how traumatized you are. So for me, I think the app thing is a good idea. Educating people, letting them, we're hoping that with this documentary, that's one of Nick's number one things I know, is to take the shame away, as if it's the person's fault that they, are experiencing subliteracy. They're experiencing this. It's not that there's this or that or the other thing. This is their experience until it shifts and it's not anymore. But the goal of this documentary is to create a movement. It's to go from 35% of our country, fourth graders, being proficient at reading to 95%, and to support the people and over time on the website too, to give resources to be, because when you watch a documentary like the one on the sex trafficking and that kind of stuff, it's like, what do I do? Tell me what to do. We want at the end of this documentary for there to be, you can do this and this and this and this. These are the action steps that you can take. So we're not just admiring the problem some more. It's been admired for decades, but what can you do? And there's things that you can do, and we have to be mindful for teenagers through adults in that emotional trauma. I mean, I taught one of the guys, Dan Corcoran, actually, that was in the film. He was the first person I taught. He knocked on my door before I even opened my reading center at my house. It was very strange. I don't even know how he got to my house, but he was looking for my then husband. And he asked me what I did. And I said, well, I'm a nurse, but I'm opening a reading center. And he's like, if I had $1 million, I'd give it to you right now, because he'd been in 36 different jobs. Anytime he'd be on a construction job and they'd do anything with reading, he'd walk off the job. He was a drug addict. He was an alcoholic, all kinds of things. And he said, the trauma of this, my whole entire life has been wrapped around the trauma of this. And he comes in here actually every month and donates money to scholarships for kids that come here. And, because there's people who want to make a difference. So we want to do things. But what happened with him too, and what happens with adults a lot, unfortunately, is they don't think that they're going to learn. And then we teach them and they start to learn, like, wait a minute, do I have to change my job? What's my spouse going to think? Because they usually do all these things that I'm going to read. Do I have to, all of these things. Dan stopped after about 6 hours because he was making progress and he disappeared. I needed like a private investigator to find him. Every single adult does this. Almost every single one disappeared, because even though what his life has been is not comfortable, it's familiar.
Right.
So changing that means what all do I have to change? So he ended up getting a job. He worked as a painter for the post office. He ended up getting a job that he had to take a written test for, passed it, got a higher job. Now he's in his 70s now, late 70s, I think. And he now owns a business with his sons and doing phenomenal. It's all over the country. And so, but all of that is a process. If we don't look at the adults and the emotional trauma, adults are not, even with really effective reading instruction, it's too much. It's just too much. And what we need to do is teach them when they're kids. And some adults, of course, will, and especially these people that are professionals that were really subliterate, and, they move quickly and they can, sometimes get through that more. I was just at a jail nearby that wants to talk to me about, they have 600 inmates, and they said they're doing all this educational stuff. They want to talk about reading instruction for the inmates. And they had a nutritionist class that they put out there, and 400 people said that they were interested in the jail. And then they had to have an application where they filled out what they eat, and they ended up with 29 people in the class, because and they said they probably couldn't fill out the application, right? I'm like, bingo. That's the kind of things that you see as a result, right? You wanted to learn about nutrition, but you are not going to show your dirty laundry, and the fact that you cannot fill out that application. And that's what David Chalk says, as far as, the 62-year-old. He said, I became an entrepreneur because I couldn't fill out a job application. So I had to do something. Or you get to a point where you get, you become a business owner, you become very successful doing something in an entrepreneurial space, and then you hire the people. Oh yeah, exactly.
They're all the
manipulation and the cleverness of how the amount of work they have to go through to manipulate this whole thing is unbelievable. It's truly unbelievable. It's, and so for me, it's this movie is this desperation that I feel like we've got one shot. We have this one shot that we can really make a difference, truly make a difference, instead of blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about it some more and admire it and more. All of the work that I do on this, and it's a full-time job on top of my full-time job, on top of my, what I do, but I do pro bono. I do it because this has to happen. We can't keep going this way. The amount of suffering is so profound. And it's so widespread, and it's so, the invisible crisis hiding in plain sight, the subtitle of the movie. Yeah, that's what it is. And people are like, oh, I don't know anybody in my life. I'm like, you just don't know you don't know anybody.
Well, it goes back to even when just listening to John share his story, the manipulation, the things that he was able to do or get other people to do.
Yeah.
It was so much more work than just coming clean,
doing life,
saying, hey, I'm just not grasping it.
He's like, why do I have to be the one to come clean? He said, I've been telling everybody, nobody could help me. Nobody could help me. I've been asking for help since I was 6 years old. And this is the problem. When you become an adult, you're like, all those teachers didn't teach me. They come to our reading center all the time. Nobody else could teach me. What makes you think you're going to teach me? You're full of baloney. Well, give me 1 hour. That's always what we say. Give me 1 hour. If you think this is the same as all the other junk you've been gone through that hasn't worked, then you never have to come back. And I don't care what your parent says, or if it's an adult, don't come back. You don't have any obligation whatsoever. And we've never had anybody do that, ever. Because,
well, go ahead.
No, it's just, and then people say, this is another thing that happens a lot with teenagers, especially boys. Oh, they're lazy. No, they're not lazy. They're not lazy. They're protecting themselves. They are no more lazy. They don't want to learn to read. Yes, they do. You know, that's like saying you don't want to learn, you don't want to breathe. Yeah, you do. It's just that it hasn't been, you know, they haven't been given the opportunity to do it. So they're protecting themselves.
Well, I hope that, you know, I feel the same as you. This is like our one shot, the one shot that's left. And you have to get people to, if you could significantly change, you know, somebody's life by just teaching them in a way that
works.
That works.
And it's so much cheaper than what they're doing in the schools, and they're paying millions of dollars to go backwards. You know, it's so much less expensive and less complicated, and less, you know, now there's all this COVID money and people are spending tens of millions of dollars. Let's do 7 programs that all contradict each other and make kids get more confused and go even further backwards. And people think that, you know, they're always saying to me, I think you're exaggerating a little bit. I'm like, I know you do. I get it. I wouldn't believe me either if I were you. I wouldn't believe it because it's too atrocious to think that it's true, but it is. You know, and it's interesting because I get a whole variety of angles. I talk to the administrators and the superintendents and the principals and the teachers, because we coach in the classroom, and then we have the parents coming in and the kids. So all of these different angles I get to see this from, and I get to have a deep dive into what's going on in schools from coast to coast, because we work from Pennsylvania to California, and we don't advertise. I have never reached out to somebody or cold called or anything and said, hey, you should look at my never, 0 times. We've trained, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 teachers, and they all search us out when they're ready, because if they're not ready, they're not going to go. But the things, you know, the science of reading, there's the science of reading, which I wish I learned in college. It's a Facebook page. Over almost 130,000 teachers have signed up for it in 2 years. Teachers are desperate. Please help me. And then now it's almost like there's so much like, wait a minute, now I'm paralyzed because there's all this information, where until 5 years ago, there was pretty much nada. You couldn't find anything. And now it's becoming much more, things have softened up and the time is right. And we can turn this around.
If you have somebody, or if there's one thing that you could say to somebody who might be watching this that is looking at their own life saying, oh, gosh, you know, maybe I should be reaching out, or maybe I'm suffering from this, or is there a way to like really self-diagnose if they're listening and they're thinking if they need to seek help? I mean, obviously you can't get through a book, or if you can't do certain things.
Well, and I know these people know what they won't write a check. They aren't going to spell. And a lot of times even their spouse, like John Corcoran's wife, didn't know he's reading at like a 1st, 2nd grade level for, 20 years of their marriage. So the people who are experiencing it, they already know. And they have that kicked in the gut feeling in their stomach and that anxiety all the time. So they know. They pick up a book and like, I keep reading this or trying to do it doesn't make sense. Or so they stay away from books. It's like me and computers. Don't ask me to program a computer. I'll throw it through the window. My little Irish temper would come out. So you stay away from that. It's like, this thing starts doing crazy stuff and I back away from the computer. It's not like, give me more computers. So I think that if they, and it's not an easy answer. It's just not an easy answer. So many people have gone to adult literacy and they've been there for years and it didn't really do much. So then it's more of a, oh gosh, look I really am dumb. I really am broken type of thing. But there is instruction that will help. There is instruction that will work. And I think the app idea is a great plan because it can be done without anybody being around. And that's hard. That is so hard John Corcoran talks about walking into the adult literacy place in California when he went there in his suit and his tie, because at that time he was a real estate developer after he'd left teaching after 17 years. And they thought he'd come in to volunteer. And he said, I want to speak to the, administrator or whoever is, and she wasn't there. So they said, oh, you want to come and volunteer? He didn't, of course, tell him he didn't. So he left and he came back again. he did come back again. But so I think I wish that I had an easy answer for that, especially as adults. I have on our website, Ebley.com, I do a webinar every month, and it's to inform people, to help parents say, hey, your kids are guessing, which is what the biggest thing is that they do. Here's how to slay the guessing monster. Your kids are not, they're looking at the picture. This is what you do here. They do these phonemic awareness games. There's this one, it's called the Alphabet Fluency, and I don't know, something else, this blog. If every parent did that, made sure their kids could write 40 letters of the alphabet and did the process that I showed them in this webinar, these kids, I mean, the correlation with their fluency going up, it's crazy. So I try to do a webinar every month. This month it's David telling his story, so it's a little bit different. But every month to teach, to help people have applicable steps. Because yeah, we don't want to admire anymore and say, yeah, a whole lot of people can't read. We get it. We know that. My kid's one of them, or two of them, or 7 of them. So what do I do? And we've done free lessons. That's another thing I did over COVID. And actually, I can send you those. There's links. I did 16 lessons for kindergartners, and I'd have like 120, with thousands of people sign up from all over the world. I'd have 125 kindergartners live on Zoom from all over the world at a time. And I did 45-minute lessons, 16 different ones. So I have kindergarten one, a first grade one, and then a second and above where we'd have adults in that one. So that's another thing that they can do where I'm actually teaching them, and they have their own whiteboard and they're doing their stuff. So that's something that I could send you that is free, and all the resources are in there and all that kind of good stuff too. We don't really have those available anymore, but we still have the links to them. So that is, I'm working on, yeah. So that you can, because right now my main focus is kindergarten through 3rd grade classroom teachers. Because if we truly had kindergarten through 3rd grade classroom teachers teaching Ebley, we would have that fence at the top of the cliff, and we would not have Humpty Dumptys fallen over by the boatloads, and having to pick them back up and remediate them, and then have them become adults and that are even more traumatized. So I had to decide. People are like, oh, you need to do this in the military. You need to do this in the jails. You need to do this. Yes. All of those are important. So what I really need to do is get in, and like I said with the jail, I'd love to do this. They of course don't have any money, and I'm like, I don't know why those of us who are doing the best work are the ones that get not paid. But I said, well, that's good because I don't either. So trying I can create lessons that we can have these guys turn on, and gals, mostly guys, and do what I do, and it will work. It's simple. It's straightforward. It's not rocket science. And we don't have to walk them through, months and years of instruction. So those are the kinds of things that take time. Right now, our time is being focused on getting our teacher training. I mean, it's all done online and all that stuff too. And our student lessons for those K-3 teachers and remediation teachers, K-12. And then to move out, how do we truly, our tagline is teaching the world to read. And I'm not kidding. I say that to my little tiny staff in this little tiny place. We are going to teach the world to read. One way or another, this is going to happen. And this documentary is part of it. So the way we teach is not typical much at all in schools, unfortunately. But
no, I believe that the work that you're doing and that you've dedicated your life to do, and that now John is doing, and that Nick is doing, putting together this documentary. I've worked with Nick for 10 years. And if there has ever been a person to be able to tell a story and shed light and bring awareness to something that is an epidemic that, it is hiding, he's going to do it justice. And it's
with integrity too.
Yes.
He is such a role model for me, because he does everything he does with it. And I get to go around to all of the, taping and stuff. So I get to spend a good bit of time with him and the film crew and all. And I'm like, what a great example you are of how to operate in life. In this documentary too, I want to be clear on this. It's not about Ebley at all, actually. It's about, there's a lot of people who have done different types of, like the lady in Missouri. She didn't teach Ebley. She's got there's instruction that will work if you learn it and you do it and you teach it with fidelity. And there's a lot of it. It's just a minutia as far as how much it is in the schools and in the classrooms. And if we get that right, then we don't have these millions, tens of millions of adults who are illiterate or subliterate that are suffering unnecessarily.
Well, I want to thank you for the time that you spent with me today. I'm so excited to continue to be a part of this and to just kind of see, hopefully, everything that is going into the documentary does shed the light that needs to be shed on this, and that, you know, there are changes that come along with that.
Yeah, the
Because
creating
there's
changes.
so many people that are suffering.
Mm-hmm. And they don't, you know, these teachers too. We've got to help the teachers. And we're going to do it. So I appreciate you inviting me because, as you can tell, I like talking about this topic. I want to say too, anything is possible. Everything is possible as far as with that too. So that's exciting. And I thank you, Jennifer, for having me.
Absolutely. And we will be back again next time.
The podcast that you are getting ready to either listen to or watch was previously recorded. Any opportunity to participate as far as a producer on this film is no longer available. However, we do encourage you to go out to thetruthaboutreading.com so that you The podcast that you are getting ready to either listen to or watch was previously recorded. Any opportunity to participate as far as a producer on this film is no longer available. However,